So welcome, welcome, welcome. And super excited to dig into the Good Food Purchasing Initiative with you all and talk about how we can radically reimagine public meals and institutional food together. We have some wonderful speakers here today. I'm going to have Jay, Dakari, Jessica, and George introduce themselves and share how they're connected to the initiative before we jump in. So I'll pass it off to Dakari, and we'll just keep passing it off to each other.
Thanks, Marley. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dakari Howard, and I am the Supply Chain Development Specialist here with Stiffpak. And today in our breakout session, I will be talking about our producer manual, which is a compiled resource guide for producers planning on selling into institutional markets. And with that, I'll pass it over to Jay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jay. I'm a grad student at the Illinois Institute of Technology. And for the past year, I've been working as a market research analyst with Stiffpak specifically on the Food Hub feasibility study. So that is what I'm going to be talking to you about. And I'll pass it on to Jessica.
Thanks, Jay. My name is Jessica Walter. I'm a research coordinator with Roosevelt University's Policy Research Collaborative. And we are working on coordinating the GFPI evaluation efforts. And I will pass that on now to George.
Well, thanks, Jessica. George Beecham, the Cook County Department of Public Health. I support with implementation of the Good Food Purchasing Program. And today I'll just go over GFPP adoption in the city of Chicago and suburban Cook County, and also just share some of our goals and key priorities.
Great. All right, I'm gonna share my screen here. Just get this up. Can you all see the screen okay?
Looks good, Marlene.
Looks good? Okay, excellent. All right. So we've done some welcomes and speaker intros. Steph, could I ask you to launch the first poll in Zoom? This poll should already be launched in the Whova platform if you're joining us through the Whova platform. But would love it if everyone, just to get us started, could answer whether you're already familiar with the Good Food Purchasing Initiative. A lot, a little, not at all. That would be really helpful. And what attracted you to this session? Are you just here to learn? Are you already familiar with this, but want to hear about what's going on in the last, couple of months, last year during the pandemic? And then how do you participate in the food system? And hopefully you can answer, hopefully that's a checkbox, so you can answer, we all play multiple roles, multiple hats. But this is super helpful for just us to get to know you all as an audience. And excited to see these results coming in. I'm going to leave the poll open just for a few more seconds here in case you haven't had a chance to answer yet. Give you just a few more seconds. Looks like 75% have voted in the survey. All right. That's pretty good. Okay, so it looks like some folks are a little, for the most part, folks have heard about the Good Food Purchasing Initiative already, a little bit. And it looks like a lot of people want to hear about the progress that's been made over the last year, just to learn more about the overall objectives of the Good Food Purchasing Initiative, and the ability to learn more about think just generally what's going on. And a pretty good mix. Love to see all the food enthusiasts in the room, and researchers, public health professionals, public policy folks, activists, food workers. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right. So before we dive into talking a little bit more about the Good Food Purchasing Initiative, want to start with some visioning with you all. So here's an intro question, or two questions. What is your institutional food dream? And by that, not to be too overly specific with this question, but what would a radically reimagined cafeteria experience look like to you? Like if you were to enter any school in Chicago, or if you were to receive a meal for seniors, or a summer meal with the Park District, or eat food in one of Cook County's health's facilities, what is your dream? What would you love to see in that space, and what kind of food would you like to see? And so please use the chat feature to share out some of those ideas with the whole audience, everyone in the meeting. And then you can use that chat feature on Whova as well. And I will try to have both up on my screen so I can see folks' responses coming in. And maybe while you're thinking about what you would love to see in a cafeteria setting in Chicago, and while you're typing that out for the chat, I'm curious if Jay, Dakari, George, Jessica, if you have any thoughts on this question that you'd like to share while people are generating it in the chat.
I mean, speaking from personal experience, I would say that I imagine cafeterias to have food that actually tastes good.
Thanks,
Same.
Jay.
Like just growing up in CPS, and having like those like routine like meals that's kind of like in circulation, and it just not being good like in the time where I was a student. Just having like more real food that was familiar with, like, or similar to the food that I was eating at home or like in other places. It seemed like the food was just like very like nuanced and what it was, and super prepackaged, and it tasted that way. So like more real food experiences.
Yeah, I agree. I think my food dream, institutional wise, would be something similar to a college level dining hall, like where there are, many options and an evolving menu. Now, I'm not sure if that's like that for every college, but like the ones who have like top level dining, where you have different options and a lot of different choices.
I'm seeing a lot of really beautiful answers in the chat. And I just keep feeling like, yes, that is, yes. Culturally appropriate meals, cafeteria meals where students have been directly connected to growing the food in their school gardens, knowing where food comes from that's on the tray, colorful food, meals that change seasonally, reflecting the abundance of what's in season, chefs cooking on the spot with local seasonal produce. Yes, loving these answers. Wide variety, supplied by growers who represent the diversity in the Chicagoland area and the Midwest. Yeah, keep these dreams coming. Because we all know, we see glimmers of hope, and we see where pieces of this dream are being implemented in cafeteria settings. But I think we need to keep dreaming and keep dreaming big. And And we'll continue to talk about what we want to see and how do we get there throughout this presentation. Just to orient you all to the session today, the good food, we'll kind of dive in first to the good food purchasing policy that has been adopted with the city of Chicago and Cook County, and what it is and how it works. And then we'll talk about the Metro Chicago's Good Food Purchasing Initiative, which is sort of this umbrella initiative that houses the policy implementation work. And then we will be splitting out into 3 different breakout rooms so that folks can dive into the new producer manual with Dakari, talk about food hubs with Jay, and talk about how do we actually evaluate the impact of this initiative with Jessica. Let's get started. Let's get into it. So the good food purchasing policy shifts the way public institutions purchase food towards 5 core values: local economies, health, a valued workforce, animal welfare, and environmental sustainability. The good food purchasing policy initially started with the LA Food Policy Council in Los Angeles, and they adopted a good food purchasing policy for the city of LA and LA Unified School District. And based on the initial success that they had with the policy implementation there, which we'll talk about a little bit later, some of the folks at LA Food Policy Council spun off and created the Center for Good Food Purchasing, which is based out of California, although they have staff throughout the country now, and they support good food purchasing policy adoption and implementation now all across the country, including here in Chicago and Cook County. So Chicago and Cook County were both early adopters of this policy. We're basically the third jurisdiction outside of we're the third jurisdiction overall to adopt it, and the first outside of California. So very excited that we're kind of on the cutting edge of this policy strategy. And it was first adopted by the Chicago Public Schools in 2017 through their wellness policy update. And it was also passed the same year by the Park District and the City of Chicago as a resolution to cover all City of Chicago departments. And then in May of 2018, the Cook County Board of Commissioners adopted a good food purchasing policy resolution as well. Some of this, for those who shared that they are very familiar with the Good Food Purchasing Initiative, this should be review for you. So thanks for bearing with us as we work through some of this background information. I just want to highlight that the good food purchasing policy in Chicago and Cook County wasn't coming necessarily out of left field. A lot of people have been dreaming about a different kind of cafeteria food, similar to some of the dreams that were coming out in the chat. And I think there's been a lot of internal champions in the city and county that have been trying to push for, healthier, more culturally appropriate, more local food and more sustainable food in the cafeteria settings, and saw this as a strategy for further building out equity and fairness in the food system. And then just some context around the policy strategy. This was brought up at a previous Chicago Food Policy Summit, and then pushed by a coalition of organizations that also, asked both mayoral candidates back in 2015, which was Chuy Garcia and Rahm Emanuel at the time, whether they would support this policy adoption, and they both supported it. And then Rahm went back into the mayor's office, and Chuy went back to serve as a Cook County commissioner. And so that's kind of how we got both the city and the county engaged in this effort around the same time. Actually, if you're able to access, I think we have a PDF in the Whova now of kind of a map of all of the agencies that buy food in the city and county. And then Dakari will be talking a little bit more about that in the producer manual session, breakout session. But the city and county buy quite a significant amount of food. There's a lot of public meal programs. And not only that, there's also concessions and festivals that the city oversees. So we're talking everything from, school food to Taste of Chicago, to the Riverwalk, to the concessions at O'Hare and Midway, and beyond. And then with the county, that's correctional food, correctional facilities, the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, and the health and hospital system. So it's a slightly smaller food spend, but still a very significant population served and significant impact that they have on the food system. We have pinpointed that over 118 million is spent by the city and county annually, but that number may be up to more than 300 million. And we're still trying to assess exactly how much the Department of Aviation's master concessionaires spend on food, as well as how much the Riverwalk concessions spend. But this could have a significant impact if the purchasing was directed towards values-based purchasing. So the good food purchasing policy prioritizes 5 values that they've built out good food standards around. And this includes nutrition, environmental sustainability, a valued workforce, local economies, and animal welfare. Just to repeat, kind of those are the 5 main lenses in which the good food purchasing policy analyzes spend and tries to make change towards more percentage of spend falling into these standards and a higher quality of each of these standards being reached. So not just, for example, like in local economies, we want to increase the amount of food that's coming from within the Chicago food shed of approximately 250 miles for produce and 500 miles for meat, dairy, and eggs. But beyond that, like we want to continue to support hyper-local connections between Chicago, like urban Chicago growers and institutions and food businesses that are based right in Chicago, so that the institutions that we're talking about are investing in community wealth and supporting the growth of businesses right with the communities that they serve. So the good food purchasing policy doesn't just kind of mandate like, hey, shift all of your food spend to organic food overnight. We know that if we told all of the departments and agencies that they had to do that, it would be really challenging. The supply chain doesn't necessarily support all of the goals that we have right now. And 2, they do have really tight budgets. And so part of this is we have to really kind of strategically make change over time and think about ways to creatively account for spending more money on certain food products and maybe using, for example, strategies like less meat, but better meat. So we can kind of balance those costs. So really this is about kind of making change over time. And first, starting off with where we're at, like what are institutions currently purchasing? What percentage of their current spend is healthy, local, fair, humane, and sustainable? And then setting goals from where they're at, so it's a little bit more realistic, and we can make change over time by primarily shifting contracts. So all of these public institutions, they go out to bid for food vendors. A lot of the public institutions in Chicago and Cook County, the vast majority, actually outsource all of their food service to a third-party food service management company that then buys food from subcontractors that they have, distributors that bring them food, and then they prepare it for the institution. So we're trying to change, contracts at multiple levels to reinforce the good food standards, and also ensure compliance so that they share their food purchasing data with us, with the Center for Good Food Purchasing, so we can continue to analyze how that spend is changing over time. So that's a huge part of this, is tracking progress and tracking like how exactly are all of these actions making change, and then recognizing that this is going to take, it's a long road, and it not only requires changing purchasing, it also requires a lot of other policy change, supportive complementary policy change. We have to celebrate, success as we're embarking on this journey. And so I mentioned there's standards set for each value category. Those standards are based on existing certification programs and best practices. So it's not like creating a new certification that supplants the USDA organic label, but it's using labels like USDA organic and other, pesticide-free, certified humane, animal welfare approved. Like there's a lot of different certifications that exist that connect to all of these value categories. So it tries to kind of provide sort of an umbrella, like if you're buying food with any of these certifications or labels, that it'll count for it'll be weighted to a certain extent based on how extensive, how respected that particular certification is. And oops, go back. It's updated every 5 years. So it's actually currently going through an upgrade at the national level right now. And we're trying to provide feedback to the Center for Good Food Purchasing and the committee that they have set up to change those standards. And then, as I mentioned previously, a lot of why a coalition of organizations and individuals in Chicago and Cook County came together to try to advance the good food purchasing policy here is that we've seen some really exciting impacts just since 2012, when the LA Unified School District implemented their good food purchasing policy. And, this is a different geography, different context, different setting than Southern California. But we think that there's a lot of things that we can do similarly here in leveraging this policy for change in these value lenses. And since we've adopted the good food purchasing policy, a whole cohort of cities and school districts and other municipalities, jurisdictions have also adopted the policy. And it's really exciting that we're in touch with them and trying to figure out, how to do this really challenging work together all across the country. And you can see, like, as overall, that there's already been over $1 billion in spend that the center has analyzed, and that will continue to go up as like some of our agencies that haven't done their baseline GFBP assessments yet continue to kind of join in and get their assessments done, and more and more of these institutions enroll. You can start to see it can have like this really massive ripple effect throughout the whole food system if these institutions are all working together to shift their spend. I'm gonna turn it over to George now. George, do you want me to keep sharing my screen, and you wanna just let me know when you want me to click to the next slide?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Great.
George Beecham, again, from the Cook County Department of Public Health, and I'll be talking about good food purchasing in Chicago and Cook County. Next slide. So local leadership for the Good Food Purchasing Program includes Chicago Food Policy and Action Council, the Chicago Department of Public Health, Cook County Department of Public Health, the Midwest Consortium on Equity and Research in Food, also known as MSER, and the Good Food Task Forces. This image that you see here is it represents the overall good food purchasing initiative, and it intends to show that the good food implementation of the good food purchasing program alone won't create the desired impacts that we would like to see on our food system. So as you can see, you have in the graphic national effort, which is very important to like GFPP expansion and really putting that pressure on our food system to shift. You also have the evaluation process, which is essential to make sure that the good food purchasing program is actually achieving what we expect it to achieve. This graphic also shows community engagement. So ensuring that with the implementation of the good food purchasing program, there's also education that goes out. There are opportunities for the public to learn about good food purchasing and also inform some of it. And then that also is how we can create the demand for good food within our public. And in addition, you have, for example, on the left side, a map of the food system. So really looking into the landscape of our food system and some of the key players and engaging with some of our local producers and really granting access to those smaller farmers or some of those local farmers who can play a key role in giving us access to the local foods that we need. Next slide. Our key objectives for the Good Food Purchasing Initiative are to implement a good food purchasing program in all relevant Chicago and Cook County departments and agencies. Currently, we're focused on implementing in our juvenile temporary detention center, our hospital, and our Cook County Sheriff's Office for Cook County. And the second initiative is to foster a racially and socially equitable food system to meet the increased good food demand. So that's, what I talked about previously with, working with some of those local and minority owned businesses, also to work with the public to inform about good food purchasing and increase the demand for good food. And our last key objective is to advance a value-based procurement system culture that supports the demand and availability of good food. Next slide, Mark. And going forward, our goals are to continue implementing the Good Food Purchasing Program process in city and county government. And we do want to recognize that a lot of our progress has been, a little bit more difficult due to the challenges of COVID and COVID-19 being a public health priority at the moment. Also, there aren't really, it's no in-person school. We're missing things like after school programs when it comes to our park districts and, things along that line that occur because of COVID that makes it, challenging to achieve that goal, but we are going to continue working on implementing the GFPP process throughout city and county government. We will continue to do goal setting and action planning with those departments and agencies who we're currently working with, which means assessing the baseline, having those conversations and those meetings to see where we can make changes to purchasing to better align with those good food purchasing standards. And as Marley stated earlier, this is not something that we expect to happen overnight, and it will be step by step, making small steps over time to ultimately reach our goals. Constituency engagement with like meal recipients or program staff or residents at those different departments engagement is also what we intend to do. And also just broader engagement of other anchor institutions within the Chicago area, just to promote good food purchasing and hopefully, get them to start adopting as well. And our last goal is to get more legislation aligned with the Good Food Purchasing Program at the state level. We've already started at the county and city. So we do want to get more legislation aligned with good food purchasing at the state level. Next slide.
Thanks, George. And So just to dig into how some of those objectives are moving forward, in addition to sort of those next steps, wanted to just highlight some of the supply chain development activities. So Dakari, just to kind of preview a little bit of of what's coming out and coming up next in the breakout session. Do you want to share anything just specifically around what's going on with supply
It's
chain
a
development?
preview of the preview. But essentially, we've been fortunate enough to be able to reach out to community and create a resource guide for producers through having conversations with producers, food distributors, researching some of the procurement processes. Thanks to George, we got a chance to get some conversations that we weren't able to sit in on, as far as some of the value packing and things like that. Just to kind of have an outline of some of the processes that food producers will have to go through these institutional markets, just because it's been siloed information for such a long time. And I think that it's been some information that's really been concentrated to some folks that's traditionally been a part of that industry. And with this good food purchasing policy, this provides a lot of opportunity for small to mid-sized farms, BIPOC farmers, women-owned business to enter into this opportunity. And without that mentorship, it could be difficult. So the manual really serves as a key tool for folks trying to enter into this larger market. So that's a brief overview of what we're about to go over. So.
And then Jay, I know you wanted to share just a little bit more around food hubs and the potential role that they could play in supporting this supply chain development work. I can.
Yes, you can click twice and get the rest of the information up once more. Yes, perfect. All right, so I just have one slide for now. And this is mainly for those of you who are not familiar with the concept of food hubs or are a little confused about it. So as a definition by the USDA, a food hub is a business or organization that actively manages the aggregation, distribution, and marketing of source-identified food products, primarily from local and regional producers, to strengthen their ability to satisfy wholesale, retail, and institutional demand. But after looking at food hubs individually and looking at the mix of services, products, and activities that each food hub does, I would honestly say that this definition does not tell you even 10% of what a food hub is or could be, because we see such unique models within food hubs all across the country. And which is why we have to run this feasibility study to assess whether having a food hub is a solution to the implementation of the GFPI. And right now we're exploring the feasibility of developing a cooperatively owned, BIPOC-led, by Black, Indigenous, people of color-led food hub that serves the Chicagoland area. And the rest of the discussion we are going to keep for the breakout sessions, but we definitely want to hear from you and see whether this is a good option and hear your opinion on it, because we are hearing a lot of interesting thoughts from across the board. That's it for me.
Thanks, Jay. Great preview teaser for more to come in the breakout session. Steph, could I ask you to launch the next poll? Yes, so just a quick check-in here for everybody in the audience. Do you think that the Good Food Purchasing Initiative has the potential to impact your life or livelihood? Just kind of hearing what you've heard so far, do you think if we're changing the food in cafeteria settings across the city and county in public meal programs and influencing concessions, will that have an impact on your life or your business if you are a farmer or a food business? So I'm going to wait until we get at least 75% of attendees to share. Give it another couple of minutes, seconds. And all right, so exciting results. Thanks for that feedback. And now we are going to have a choose your own adventure breakout time. So for the next half an hour, you have 3 options. You'll be able to stay in the main room here with us and talk with Dakari about the resources being built to help producers, small food businesses understand the growing demand for good food with institutions and how you might be able to leverage that to support your businesses. And then Jay will be breaking out to talk about the work that he's done with the Food Hub feasibility study. That will be one of your options. And then Jessica will be talking about the evaluation plan. And Jessica, I feel like you haven't had a chance to do a teaser yet on what that's going to entail. Do you want to real quick just share out what folks will be talking about in that group?
Yeah, we kind of are envisioning our breakout session to be, and I'm speaking as if there's multiple people because our director who can't be here today for the Policy Research Collaborative helped design this. So I say we because she's here in spirit. But we're kind of envisioning this as almost more of like a feedback kind of discussion session. So we're going to talk about the kind of questions we're asking, how we're planning to measure them, the kind of intention of the evaluation framework, and then wanting to kind of see how everybody sees the questions that we're asking, the impact we're hoping that it's going to have, and then any feedback that you have for us.
Great. All right. So without further ado, Steph, do you want to open the breakout rooms for us? I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Really
And
quick.
then we'll continue to have ASL interpretation and Spanish translation provided in this main room. And if you have any questions about that or accessing either of those services in a breakout, please private message Michelle, who's one of our accessibility team members for this session.
Yeah. Cool. So I'm going to open up rooms. And folks, if you don't have the most updated version of Zoom, you may not have received the prompt to enter a room. So if you want to enter a room, just put in the chat where you want to go and I will put you there.
You should see 2 rooms provided, exploring food hubs and evaluating the Good Food Purchasing Initiative food system impacts. You should be able to click join to join either of those conversations with Jay and Jessica. And if you want to stay in this main room, you can join Dakari to talk about the producer resources. And it looks like some folks are asking for a room choice. Thank you for doing that in the chat. For folks that are still here, I also realize we are going to come back together for the last 10-15 minutes for a regroup, and should have mentioned that earlier.
The rooms have 35 minutes and then they bring everyone back.
Awesome. Thanks, Steph.
No problem. Becoming a breakout room expert through this conference. Food Hub. Okay. Sorry, folks. I'm going slowly, but it's happening. If you put in the chat that you wanted to go somewhere, I'm getting to you. Okay. Noah. Room 3. Margot. I think Margot found her way.
Yeah, I moved Margot and Anna. I'm sorry, I was trying to help.
We're helping, yeah, thank you. Usually the names are organized alphabetically, but they're not today, which is a bummer. Miranda Johnson.
I got her.
Thank
I
you.
realize we all have this. Co-hosts can help.
Yeah, well, we can tell if they've been moved because their name will go from blue to gray. So yeah, all of you are welcome to help. This is very helpful. Okay, does everyone in this room want to talk about the producer manual? Big group. Okay, Megan, I'm gonna put you in food hubs to take notes in that one. And Michelle, I'm gonna put you, whoops, in the evaluating GFPI one to take notes. And Ellie, I got you. Okay. I think this is our group.
This is us. Cool. Thank you, Steph, for getting all that coordinated, and thank you, Marley, for the transition. Give me 1 second, y'all, so I could start sharing the screen and begin the PowerPoint. All right. And so can everybody see my screen? Cool. So as I was mentioning earlier, I mean, like, we are super excited to, have been able to compile this information and share out with folks. Just because, like, this, I think is super important in laying out a clear pathway for people to begin this institutional selling process. As we talked about before in this entire summit, I think that we've been looking at ways that we could reimagine and reshape the food system that we're currently experiencing. And just historically, like, with a gap in equity and capital amongst, like, vulnerable populations that we have here. This policy really enhances opportunities for folks who've been marginalized within this food system and haven't had access to mentorship nor pathways within communities. So I think this is, like, really important work, and it's really cool that we've been able to, like, talk with community and continue to have conversations with community as it's being developed. And also, just as a disclaimer, like, this is a brief review of the living document that we'll be posting on our website with Stiffpak. And because things are changing, right now we're looking at COVID-19, so it's a ton of opportunities emerging as well as a ton of challenges emerging, and people are still, like, not in a very stable place when it comes to, like, the operations and business operations they've been going forward with. So we're excited to say that this is going to be a living document that's going to be really plastic and malleable and easily adaptable. But at the same time, we are creating a more tangible producer manual that's a little bit more concrete with more stable resources that we would like to share that I think is going to be able to serve for a longer period of time. And with that, I guess we could begin. So the purpose of this producer manual is basically an introduction to growers about the opportunity of the good food purchasing policy in Metro Chicago. Using creative design and simple language, the manual will cover what GFPP is, identify immediate opportunities for local producers to leverage the policy/the program, and highlight the most critical certifications and requirements that the institutional buyers will need. So as Marley kind of gave us earlier, just like a quick overview of what GFPP is. Essentially, the Good Food Purchasing Campaign encourages larger institutions to direct their buying power towards 5 core values: local economies, environmental sustainability, value workforce, animal welfare, and nutrition, using the Good Food Purchasing Program to guide their efforts. And some of the critical components of this campaign success lies in the local political champions that we have committed to using the public contracting process to ensure the good food is right and not a privilege for their constituents, and that food suppliers reflect an institutional, social, and environmental value. Looking at supportive administrators who are eager to measure and communicate the impact of their food purchases and committed to making an even larger, greater change. And then the multi-sector coalitions that reflect the 5 values and build local ownership and long-term relationships with institutions and regional suppliers to ensure local accountability and commitment. And just looking at like policy adoption in Chicago and Cook County, talking about Cook County and how it became the 3rd local government in the US to approve a resolution promoting the Good Food Purchasing Program. And looking at the city of Chicago, how it adopted the policy back in 2017. So just giving folks like, I guess, folks who are newer to GFPP and what it is, this section will just cover like some of the background information about, what are the components that lie within it, what's the historical context with Chicago and Cook County, et cetera. And now looking at like just the values that shape the Good Food Purchasing policy. And when we're looking at that, we're talking about, of course, nutrition, environmental sustainability, value workforce, local economies, and animal welfare. But what does this mean for, local producers? So when we're talking about local economies, we're looking at, ways that we could support diverse, small to mid-sized food producers in the region. And that's from an institutional standpoint, but from the producer standpoint, ensuring that your produce is grown within 250 miles of the state of Illinois, 500 miles for meat and dairy products. Your farm must be a family or cooperatively owned. No corporately owned farms are, considered part of this local economy value chain or values standard. Products are weighed locally. So, for example, partial points for producers if they were manufacturing tortillas, but the local wheat, but the wheat is not locally produced. So, like institutions, they will only be able to get partial points. So it's merit based in that, like, if a producer is looking to purchase and gain points through local economies, they're looking at how local is this produce and if it's manufactured locally versus like sourced outside and just manufactured locally. And then looking at environmental sustainability, just figuring out ways that folks can start reducing their carbon footprint and source from producers that use a little bit more sustainable methods. And this is kind of heavily weighed upon certification requirements. So Certified Humane, Food Alliance Certified, Seafood Watch, USDA Organic are some of the certification requirements that we are really looking for producers to kind of hop into and while they're entering these institutional markets. No fish on the avoid list for the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch Guide, and at least 25% of animal products are antibiotic free. Oops. Now we're looking at like value workforce. So on the institutional side, looking at ways that we can support or source from suppliers that provide safe working conditions, fair compensation for all food chain workers and producers. And on the producer side, just ensuring that no slave or forced labor is practiced, no child labor, no serious patterns of willful, repeated, persuasive labor violations in the past 3 years. Some of the qualifying certifications are really just like union contracts. So just guaranteeing your stuff is fair trade certified, or like hopping into a union contract such as United Food Workers or an organization such as that. Looking into food justice certification from the Agricultural Justice Project, looking into the Equitable Food Initiative certification, supplying to a unionized vendor or a worker cooperative. And now we're going into animal welfare, looking to work with producers to provide healthy and humane conditions for farm animals. Qualifying certifications would include USDA Organic, Certified Grass-Fed, Certified Humane Pasture Raised. Explore whether or not animal welfare certification makes sense for your farm. For produce, legume, and grain growers, like ID the protein your products offer and how they can support the institution of reducing the animal proteins. And then nutrition is like the last of the value standards. But that's, I think, more heavily weighted on the institution that's purchasing from the suppliers, because it goes into like the preparation of the foods that we're having. And also just like part 2 of this manual will start looking at the public institutional landscape within Metro Chicago. So looking at some of the following departments: Chicago Public Schools and their participation in school meals, Chicago Park District summer after school meals, Chicago Department of Family and Supportive Services, senior meals, emergency meals, City Colleges of Chicago, and within the cafeterias, George has mentioned earlier about the dining standards. Chicago Department of Aviation, Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, so food festivals Marley was mentioning earlier. Chicago Department of Assets, Information and Services, the Riverwalk, opportunities such as that. Chicago Housing Authority, and looking at the Cook County landscape, partnerships with the Cook County Sheriff's Office, Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, Cook County Department of Corrections, Cook County Health and Hospitals, Cook County Bureau of Asset Management, with vending and concessions. And this is a tool that we plan on using. It's called a Kumu map. And this will be launched on our website too. And it is very interactive. And it pretty much maps all the key players that are a part of this initiative right now. So as you can see, it like breaks down paired within the City of Chicago departments and sister agencies, Cook County government, and then it starts going into the Cook County Health and Hospital Services, Forest Preserve, District of Cook County, and just all the different entities and like how they spread apart. And so you could just kind of like create those pathways and see where this food is coming from, where does it go, having some contact information for folks that you want to reach out to say, you know, I want to begin a contract to start that relationship building process. And yeah, so that will be launched coming soon. It's always going to be updated when new opportunities kind of present themselves. And so some of the requirements that go into this, going into institutional markets. So one of the first things that we're looking at is looking at food safety. So with that, we're looking at like FSMA, which is the Food Safety Modernization Act. It's a regulation standard that establishes preventative controls on how produce is grown, packed, processed, shipped, and imported into the United States. And with FSMA is essentially transforming the nation's food safety system into one that's based on prevention of foodborne illness, as opposed to responding to some of the foodborne illnesses and trying to contain those. But the standards essentially emphasize preventative controls for human food, produce safety standards, foreign supplier verification, accredited third-party auditors, sanitary transport of food and feed. And so if you're a smaller farmer, the FSMA is something that you always have to adhere to, but is more of like a macro perspective of food safety. Whereas Produce Safety Alliance is one of the more like intimate produce safety standards that, you know, smaller producers hop into. And the Produce Safety Alliance was established to help prepare fresh food for growers to meet the regulatory requirements included in the FSMA. The PSA provides fundamental science-based on-farm food safety knowledge to fresh fruit and vegetable farmers, packers, regulatory personnel, and others that's interested in the safety of fresh produce. And this includes accessing food safety risks, implementing good agricultural practices, and how to meet regulatory demands associated with the FSMA produce safety rule, as well as meet bio requirements for food safety. Then we hop over to just some more of the food safety requirements. USDA Harmonized Good Agricultural Practices. So in June 2009, the United Fresh Food Safety Council endorsed a plan to drive harmonization of GAP standards to reduce audit fatigue and allow operations to focus their food and safety resource on achieving food safety rather than passing audits. And this plan evolved into the Produce GAP Harmonization Initiative. And it's an all-industry effort, including growers, shippers, producers, buyers, government agencies, audit organizations, and other stakeholders. And essentially, it is a set of GAP standards that audit checklists, or a set of GAP standards and audit checklists for pre and post-harvest operations applicable to all fresh produce commodities and size of on-farm operations and regions in the United States, for the overarching goal of one audit by any credible third party, acceptable to all buyers. So it pretty much just carries this umbrella and protects literally all and anybody participating in the food system to say like, this is the set standard that we have, as opposed to saying like my operation is unique and it's operating in this way. Everybody is having to adhere to these standards. And group gap is something that like we're really excited about as well, and opportunities for group gap, because of, you know, we're talking about working with small to mid-sized farmers and marginalized farmers for that matter. And group gap it's an opportunity for folks to pretty much band together and pool some resources together to achieve that gap certification, which could be an extremely costly process. But just as a definition, Group GAP is a USDA farm food safety program that provides the entire specialty crop industry the opportunity to supply and buy fruits, vegetables, and related products that are certified as being produced using good agricultural practices by allowing farmers, food hubs, marketing organizations of all sizes to band together and pool some resources to achieve USDA GAP certification. And right now, actually, AUA is in the process of creating a cohort towards the end of the fall. Advocates for Urban Agriculture are in the process of creating a cohort towards the end of the fall to kind of practice some of these group gap opportunities. And so I guess that process will start beginning in the beginning of next year. But, you know, I think it's an extremely beneficial pilot program here in the city and county that folks could adopt and kind of look to as a model, and now have a network of folks that they could reach out to as resources, say like, hey, like this process is interesting. And could you help us out with us establishing a group for Group Gap and being audited in that way? Primus GFS is a global food safety initiative, recognized audit certification program for the certification of produce sector products, from growing operations to minimally processed fresh cut produce products. But also just going back to Group Gap, some of the benefits for participants is just like it saves group members money through cost and resource sharing, improves group members' accountability and performance by leveraging shared resources, decreases documentation and maintenance requirements for group members who operate under a single quality management system, and it uses internal audits and shared food safety manager to make member compliance a little bit easier. All right, so requirements for institutional marketing. Now we're looking at like volume and packing. So essentially, like with volume and packing, this is where the relationship building and transparency process on your operations is key. However, at the same time, we do connect producers to a ton of resources as they reference and they begin this process. But some of the information that we were able to collect was through the conversations that Georgia at Cook County Department of Public Health was able to achieve through talking with some food distributors such as Midwest Foods, Christina Foods, Black Dog. And when it comes to volume and packing, it seems like that's a big part of like the relationship building. It didn't have necessarily like a set minimum of what volume distributors were looking for. It was more so like establishing a relationship with the producers, understanding what their operation is right now, seeing what their capacity is and what their capacity is to continuously like produce or continuously like produce given a set period of time. I guess, yeah, so it depends on like the specific product as well, availability to supply consistently, and looking at some scheduling opportunities for people, and then going into becoming an approved vendor. With a private distributor, it seems like the steps to becoming an approved vendor began with producers reaching out to sales manager to begin the relationship building process and set up a vendor account. During this process, suppliers usually meet with vendors to discuss the operation details such as the product, the volume, the pricing, delivering schedule, and availability. And prior to establishing these contract requirements and agreements, most vendors require producers to have some sort of food safety and handling certification. So going back to the USDA GAP certifications and things like that. And as far as the public entities, it's just like incorporating, well, what we're doing with the producer manual, I guess we will just be incorporating the link to Department of Procurement Services, which kind of outlines the building process, looking at requirements, the pre-bid requirements, acceptable certifications, and just contract language. And I think that's like essentially like the biggest part of that, like just having resource to that contract language and understanding like what information is needed when you begin those conversations and when you begin reaching out to try to become in a position to start doing some institutional selling, knowing exactly what it is that you have and having like a good sense of like bookkeeping and record keeping to share with your partners so that they know exactly like what it is they can work with, and understanding what your operation is able to kind of keep up with. Then we're going into minority and women-owned certifications. So with that, training opportunities and resources will be provided by the Women's Business Development Center and the Chicago Minority Supplier Development Council, which essentially equips business owners to better understand corporate and contracting, government procurement. And and it's a super useful certification when it comes to, networking and tapping into public contracts and business development resources. And the EMBA binder includes some very useful definitions and contract terms for marketing with certifications and frequently asked questions. So I think it really lays out like some of the contractor languages that I think people just don't have a lot of access to if they haven't already been involved in institutional selling or know anybody that's been involved in institutional selling at that degree. And so now I guess I wanted to open it up for discussion questions because I think that the beauty in creating a resource guide is just having like community input and saying that this is something that like we want to see as far as like information that hasn't been shared just now that could be useful for folks. So like, for example, deciding like when it's appropriate for a smaller producer to say, I want to enter into these institutional markets and like my CSA is doing well, but maybe it might be opportunities to hop into like this other category and sell at like a larger value. Looking at ways that people could sell into institutional markets and say like, I want to get paid what my work is worth, but at the same time, I want to maintain that my food is affordable for the community that I'm in. So this is an opportunity I think that I want to share with you all and kind of having some discussions about what might be some of you all's concerns when it comes to institutional selling and how it pertains to like your own operations or something that you might see within community now. And you could share that in the chat or because I can't see the chat right now. So if it had been any questions right now, that'd be a good time that we could kind of chime in. And also like this is Zoom etiquette. I mean, you could unmute yourselves if you want to also.
To get the ball rolling, I can read out one question in the chat, but since it's such a small group going forward, as long as we're not talking over each other, I think it's fine if we unmute and ask questions to the group. Also really quickly, this is Steph speaking. So from Taylor Choi in the chat, will Stiffpak be partnering with other organizations to provide educational opportunities for farmers and vendors to learn about necessary record keeping?
Yes. Yes. So a big part of like what we're doing with the supply chain, not only is it creating this producer manual, but it's also coordinating some trainings, and we do those trainings through our partners. And when creating resources for community members, I think that it's important because I think that a lot of folks are doing this work to create like a more resilient food system. And some of the things that we've been thinking about is like, how do we create an environment where we're being complementary towards one another's efforts as opposed to duplicating some things that folks have been doing. So right now, AU Advocates for Urban Agriculture has been an organization that I've personally been connecting with a little bit more because they have the Grown in Chicago tool, which kind of sets up emerging producers as business developers and do some workshops as far as like getting people's operations from backyard and self-sustaining to more business oriented, which is something that transitions into like what we're doing. So like at that point where you are now established as a business, you could begin that institutional selling process. So talking with AUA, we've been figuring out, or we've been in discussion about trying to find ways where we could start promoting some marketing tools and marketing workshops for producers to say like, hey, like I'm at this point now where I want to consider these institutional markets, but I want that training, I want that mentorship. So that's an example of like how we partner to host these trainings and webinars, and actually also with Illinois Extension coming up, which I'll share later in this PowerPoint as well. With Catherine Pereira, like we're gonna have one about think you're too small for wholesale markets, think again, and that's where we're laying out some opportunities for folks to kind of like see the opportunities for them to begin growing their business and hopping into wholesale markets and what are some of the obstacles there. Another example of like us partnering. So Stiffpak, we do try to like put a big effort on building those relationships and tapping into our networks and providing training for the public.
Hey, Dakari, could we stop sharing the screen just for now since we're talking so everyone can see each other?
Yeah, my bad.
Oh, that's okay. And then you can see the chat too, because there's lots of great questions.
Gotcha.
Okay, so next in the chat, we have related to record keeping. Will there be support for business planning and how to shift a business model from something like a CSA to incorporate institutional sales?
I'm sorry, Steph, I was reading something. Could you repeat that one more time?
Okay, this is Steph speaking. Related to record keeping, will there be support for business planning and how to shift a business model from something like a CSA to incorporate institutional sales?
I think so. And, I think that's like one of the important parts of like, just having these discussions right now. Cause I think that, had we not, I think that was one of the plans initially, to create some resources for record keeping and how to shift one's business. But, this is like, important conversations so that we can include that into the producer manual. Literally, because if it was just based on us to kind of use our own perspectives and saying like, this is what people need, then it wouldn't be fair to folks to assume what people need. We need to hear what people need to include that in the resource guide. We want to make it as useful as possible for folks. So, the more contribution, the better.
Okay, will the manual be released in multiple languages?
Yes.
Which
Yes.
language?
So the plan is at least initially, I think that Spanish is a big language translator that we usually go to. But if anybody else has some more languages that we should incorporate or resources that we could leak out to kind of get some Spanish interpreters or like other language interpreters, let us know. And, we'll do our best in connecting that and sharing that to make it more accessible to everybody.
Cool. Okay, so circling back to our first question, a follow-up question. Will Stiffpak be working to provide funding for those to receive certifications?
I think that something that we've done with the PSA is we've been able to partner with some folks doing the Produce Safety Alliance training to where it was free. It was free for some select producers to get that certification. So things like that is definitely an option. So looking at ways that people don't have to pay for these certifications so that we could like just literally mitigate all of these barriers of entry. So that's definitely something that's in the works.
And so I'll just pop in over here and take myself off of mute. Hi, I am Taylor. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with Green City Market. I am their operations associate, so I'm constantly looking for new vendors to add into our mix that'll diversify our farmers at our markets. And our organization is looking to provide funding through something called a Farm Forward Fund for emerging producers, sustaining and developing producers. They're just basically different names for how long farmers have been in the industry and how long they've been producing. And we're looking to create more funding resources for emerging farmers to obtain those certifications. And we would think it'd be a great idea to partner with Stiffpak to, share those vendors if we're funding them to also be a part of institutional production as well. So I would love to be in contact with you all to maintain those relationships.
Absolutely. Thank you, Taylor. And so at the end of the presentation, I will be sharing my contact information. So anybody on this right now, they can reach out to me.
This is Steph speaking. In the chat, we have another similar question. How can organizations like the Greater Chicago Food Depository help? Is there a sign-on letter, a state legislator engagement we could help with, any specific updates we should know? And if you could also answer it a little more broadly too, like how does GFCD help, but then how does everyone else on this call support as well?
I think everybody else could support in this by directing your network of producers towards this producer manual that we'll be sharing. We'll always be, kind of keeping up with some updates about trainings, some legislation that is going on right now so that people are like informed and know kind of what's going on. And I guess just like staying in contact. I'm always in contact. I'm communicating with producers. I'm communicating with food distributors. I'm communicating with other partners just like here within the food shed. So having conversations. So yeah, I'll definitely be reaching out to you, Ashley, and seeing what's going on pretty soon.
Okay, another follow-up question to a previous one. Are the minority and women-owned business certifications prohibitively expensive? And does GFPP require those to recognize farmer businesses as BIPOC owned or led?
As far as the expenses go for the minority and business and women-owned business certifications, I'll drop a link really quick so that you all can see some of the training and cost evaluations associated with that. But it is a really good network that I think that folks should tap into, because that could be its own session in its own. I think it's really dynamic in that way. But GFPP it shows preference to BIPOC owned and led organizations. So the incentive is to kind of like promote some more equity in this very like racist and suffocated food system that we have right now. Requirement, not necessarily. Encouragement, yes, though. We do encourage folks to identify as BIPOC owned and led. But it's definitely not a requirement. I mean, we work in the entire food shed. We working with small to mid-sized farmers. So whatever that may look like, but preference is given to BIPOC owned and led farm operations.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. We've got 2 minutes on the clock. Alex France asked this a while ago. This is kind of a nitty-gritty question. If a family set up as an LLC, etc., would that count as a family farm and not a corporation?
Yes. And also we will be showing some graphics that will break down the sizes and the amount of income that farms are making, so that you do fit into that small to mid-sized family-owned cooperation. And really quick, I'm sharing my screen one more time to just show y'all some last minute trainings coming up and my email, so folks can have it. Give me 1 second. All right. So some of the resources that I just want to shout out before we get off the call. Illinois Extension webinar, Too Small for Wholesale's Market. Think again, March 25th, 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. The AUA Growing in Chicago tool, I think that's really key, because what we're talking about with this institutional selling, that I think for some folks that's really down the line, and I think this is a good opportunity now for people to begin that business development for themselves, earning those certifications, so that's an easier transition to kind of get into that institutional selling piece. So I encourage folks to tap into the Growing in Chicago tool from Advocates from Urban Agriculture. I think it's growninchicago.com instead of on the actual Advocates for Urban Agriculture page. So check that out. For institutional selling workshops, the Department of Procurement Services, How to Become Certified, has a training March 10th, 2 to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. And Department of Procurement Services also have the e-procurement 101, which kind of taps into like what I was talking about, where like right now we're in these strange times where like we're only communicating via computer and virtually. So e-procurement might be an option for some people to get into, just to kind of see like what that process and operation looks like. And they'll be holding that training on March 11th from 2 to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. I'll leave this up for a second for folks that's taking notes, and then I'll just go over to my closing slide, just showing.
Heads up, Takari, other folks are entering. So you've got like another 30 seconds. But
all right, here I go. Thank you. Again, I'm Dakari Howard, Supply Chain Development Specialist here with Stiffpak, and my email is Dakari, DAKARAI, @chicagofoodpolicy.com. And again, I appreciate you all for taking the time to hop into this session with me.
Welcome back. If you were in a breakout conversation and you're just joining back into the main room, welcome back. Hope you had a good discussion in your breakout. We wanted to just go around and connect all of the different conversations that just happened in the last 8 minutes here before the session is over, and kind of close out with some final thoughts. So we did not assign particular report back speakers, but I would just ask the presenters maybe to share a couple of insights from the conversation. So maybe starting with Jessica, would you be able to share kind of an overview of what the discussion in the evaluation group?
Yeah, so we had a really good conversation about impacts and what we want to see, and some really good thoughts on what's being measured and how, and what collaboration like really looks like, and how to make sure we're really engaging and partnering. All of these are really kind of difficult things, I think, to sum up too quickly. But I think there was some really good conversation about, you know, what equity and true change in the food system needs to look like, and how we can hopefully use the GFPI to get there.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. Jay, any emergent thoughts from your discussion in the Food Hub group?
Yes. So the folks highlighted some really interesting points regarding the challenges that are currently faced, and what are the biggest challenges in aggregating local foods in particular, and how to implement that into the system. So yes, we heard of the need for integrating new technology, because the ones that currently exist cannot meet the scale, at least in terms of production, meeting the local demand by local suppliers. There's still a major gap where the local suppliers cannot always meet the local demand. And a solution to that could be to introduce certain technology like vertical gardens as urban farms to increase the amount that we're producing. And then there were discussions on the wage for the people working on farms, which in most cases, a high percentage of it is immigrant labor. And it appears that the labor forces are not given fair wages. And that's partly because the farmers have always been price takers. They cannot set the price of their own product, which is being dictated to them by the distributors and the larger organizations. So they themselves, in order to sustain their living, they cannot necessarily afford to provide the best or the most fair wages to their workforce. So it's not necessarily that they're against their own labor, but it's the lack of choice. And then there were other topics, smaller discussions around things like these, and other stuff related to the local systems.
Thanks, Jay. Dakari and George, thoughts from the producer manual discussion?
Yeah, I mean, we really had like a good discussion portion, just to kind of like enhance the way that the producer manual can be accessible for folks, providing it in multiple languages, figuring out like some of the ways that, you know, Stiffpak and other organizations can support and fund this. So I mentioned, you know, how we, you know, figured out some ways that people can enter into the Produce Safety Alliance training without paying for it. And just looking at like more opportunities and how we could share those opportunities with folks as they obtain these certifications. Answering some questions about the requirements for GFPP and how like BIPOC and centered on equity is a big key factor in ensuring success like within this process and policy. But yeah, I mean, overall it was a good session. We kind of just outlined some of the things that we will be covering, looking at some food safety standards, some vendor, so how to become an approved vendor, volume and packing things. But before I hop off, I also want to just share some of the resources that I share with the smaller group, but with the large group as well. Just talking about the Illinois Extension webinar, Too Small for Wholesale Markets. Think again, March 25th, 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. AUA Grown in Chicago tool for business development opportunities for smaller producers. Department of Procurement Services, How to Become Certified, March 10th, 2 to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. Department of Procurement Services, E-Procurement 101, March 11th, 2 to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. And George, if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, you covered it all. Yeah.
I will add one more point that I just remembered, that there's, and it's an important one, that there is a lot of confusion amongst the consumers of what is local, what defines local. Is it a 300 to 400 mile radius? Is it your state? Or is it anything that has been grown within the United States? And I want to, because that was the last thing we were discussing before we left off, I want to add some more insight to that, in the sense that some organizations like Walmart will define local as anything that's produced in the US. And they can very well and legally put up a large sign on their produce section that this is sourced locally. But then other organizations will have other definitions. But a Food Hub's definition of what is local would be a 300 to 400 mile radius within from the place where it is, the hub is located. So yeah, that was my last point.
Yeah, good one, Jay. Well, thank you so much. We have one final poll that we'll launch here at the end. Just if you are interested in staying more involved in the Good Food Purchasing Initiative, we want to know how. Thanks, Steph, for launching that. And just to close out, thank you to Dakari, George, Jessica, Jay for leading the session, and Steph for your support, and for everyone in the audience who joined us for the full hour and a half. We're very appreciative of your time, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're trying to see how you're interested in staying involved, but we'll all drop in our emails into the chat so you can follow up with us. And please rate this session. There's a button in Whova right underneath the live stream where you can just click rate session, share some immediate feedback, and don't forget to share, complete our full Chicago Food Justice Summit survey as well. That feedback will only help us make events like this more engaging and enriching. So appreciate y'all, and have a great rest of the Food Justice Summit today. Oh, and I'll let everyone see the results of this poll in another 15 seconds if you're curious.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure talking to you all.
Awesome results. So opportunities to engage in coalition building and expand GFPP participation throughout Illinois takes the lead, which is awesome. And we'll make sure that we note this and try to follow up with attendees on future opportunities.
Also, huge thank yous to all of our volunteer support. Thank you.
And translation and interpreters, thank you. Okay.